The gavel had fallen minutes earlier, but the room did not breathe. Light from the high courtroom windows cut across the worn wooden benches, catching dust motes that floated like tiny witnesses. At the center of that hush sat a man who carried his country's scars not on a uniform, but in the quiet lines of his face. 70 years, a veteran whose shoulders still remembered the weight of service. He folded his hands as if holding memory itself. Outside, news vans had lined the courthouse steps all morning. Inside, phone screens lit with comments and hashtags. A city watching, waiting for justice. The veteran's eyes tracked the defendant, a young man in a crisp jacket, the kind of tailored confidence that had been raised behind a powerful name. He sat with a smirk that said the world owed him something. People in the gallery shifted uneasily. A child craned forward, eyes wide. An older woman dabbed at her lips with the tissue. The air tasted like tension, metal, and rain, and the paper scent of old law books. Judge Caprio sat at his bench like a calm in the storm. He folded his glasses deliberately, his fingertips brushing the bridge as if weighing every second. He listened to the breathing of the room. A judge who knew silence could speak louder than testimony. For him, the law was not a script to be followed, but a moral architecture that needed tending. He had watched generations pass through that courtroom, the guilty, the redeemed, the arrogant who learned to bend. The veteran's hand trembled as he shifted in his seat. It was slight at first, a small, dignified quiver that belonged to age and old stories. No one rushed to him. Respect kept them still. He cleared his throat, a dry sound that sent a ripple across the room. His jaw tightened. He rose slowly, each movement deliberate, like a man stepping into a role he had never sought, but now must play. Then, without warning, color drained from his face. His shoulders folded, and for one terrible second, the courtroom's collective heartbeat stuttered. He clutched at his chest, eyes searching the room as if trying to stitch together a memory with a look. Gasps rose in a single, raw chord. Someone called for help. A bailiff leapt forward, hand steady, while the defendant's smirk faltered into a look the room had never seen. Confusion, then instant regret, then fear. Judge Caprio's voice cut through like a lighthouse, calm, measured, exact. "Someone fetch medical," he said, and the command brought movement, people leaning in to help. Phones flipped to cameras slipping back into pockets. But under the practical motion, something deeper shifted. The theater of arrogance had been punctured. The veteran, who had walked into that courtroom as the wronged and quiet, now lay vulnerable in front of a city watching through glass and screen. For a beat, the defendant's privileged world looked uncertain. The smug posture could not hold against the sight of real human fragility. The courtroom that had waited for spectacle instead found itself holding its breath for a life. In that tense, humming silence, the true gravity of what had happened and what would be decided settled like dust on every shoulder. The courthouse steps had been crowded long before sunrise. Reporters stood shoulder to shoulder, steam rising from their coffee cups, as they rehearsed lines for the noon broadcast. Inside, the echoing hallways funneled restless energy into Courtroom 3. People filed in with whispers tucked into the folds of their coats. Whispers about power, privilege, and a city that had been holding its breath for far too long. The last row filled first older residents who had known the veteran for decades, neighbors who remembered him sweeping his porch at dawn or handing out candy to children every Halloween. They sat stiffly, anger and grief etched into folded arms and tight jaws. In the middle rows sat younger faces, drawn by the viral clip that had already circled social media millions of times. And nearer the front, a local journalist adjusted her lens, hoping to catch the moment when justice would tilt one way or the other. Judge Caprio entered quietly, but the room shifted as though pulled by an unseen thread. His presence softened the noise, yet sharpened every expectation. He gave a gentle nod, acknowledging the room's tension without giving it permission to control the proceedings. His robe settled around him like a still pond absorbing the impact of a single pebble. On his bench lay the file, a thin stack of paper, but inside it held the weight of a community's doubt and a man's pain. The veteran had arrived early that morning. He moved slowly, cane tapping the tiled floor in patient rhythms. His faded jacket, neatly pressed, carried a faint scent of cedar and thyme. He paused at the entrance, fingers lingering on the wooden doorway as if gathering strength from the grain. People rose instinctively when he entered, not because they were told to, but because respect moved them like a tide. Across the courtroom, the defendant and his entourage arrived with an entirely different energy. Cameras swiveled. Attorneys stepped aside. The police chief's son walked with the effortless confidence of someone who had never been told no without it, later turning into "Don't worry, we'll fix it." His designer jacket contrasted sharply with the veteran's simple attire. He slid into his seat with a lazy arm stretch, whispering something to a friend that earned a short snicker. A murmur rolled across the gallery, not loud enough to be called disruption, but heavy enough that everyone felt it. A woman leaned to her husband. "He doesn't even look sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling with restrained anger. Judge Caprio glanced toward them, not in reprimand, but in acknowledgement. He understood the emotional stakes far better than anyone realized. Cases like this didn't just test the law, they tested the faith people placed in it. Outside the tall windows, clouds gathered. The light dimmed, pulling shadows over the room. It felt as though the building itself braced for the truth that would unfold. The bailiff's voice rang out formally, "All rise." The courtroom obeyed, rising like a single, steady wave. Feet shuffled against marble. Papers were tucked away. The veteran's gaze lifted toward the bench. The defendant cracked his knuckles. Judge Caprio surveyed the room, letting the silence ripen just long enough to remind everyone why they were here. "Please be seated," he said softly. His tone was warm, but behind it lay something unshakably firm. The sense that today would not be ordinary, nor would it bow to titles or badges. And as everyone settled back into their seats, the case that had fractured a community and exposed a family's shadow finally began to breathe. The heavy wooden doors creaked open again, drawing every gaze toward the back of the courtroom. The defendant entered, not with hesitation, but with the swagger of someone convinced the world still rotated around his convenience. His chin tilted upward, shoulders loose, a faint smirk tugging at one corner of his mouth. Even his footsteps seemed to announce entitlement. Slow, casual, almost performative. A few members of the gallery stiffened. One man whispered, "He thinks this is a joke." It was not a joke. Not today. He adjusted the collar of his designer jacket before sliding into his seat. His attorney leaned in, offering a hushed instruction, but the young man barely nodded, his eyes drifting instead toward the cameras. He liked attention. It showed. Across the aisle, the atmosphere felt entirely different. The 70-year-old veteran sat with quiet dignity, hands folded carefully over his lap. He didn't look at the defendant. He didn't need to. His silence carried more moral weight than any accusation. His breathing was slow, measured, each rise and fall of his chest revealing years of discipline. Years of service the defendant had never bothered to understand. The veteran's cane rested against his knee, polished from years of use. It was steady, unlike the faint tremor in his fingers. His attorney spoke softly to him, a few reassuring words, but the veteran only nodded once. He was not here for revenge. He was here because justice deserved a witness. The gallery reacted in subtle waves. Some leaned forward, brows furrowed with disbelief at the defendant's arrogance. Others looked toward the veteran with quiet respect. A young woman wiped her eyes, whispering, "Grandfather served too. He didn't deserve this." Then Judge Caprio entered. The shift was immediate. The room straightened, the noise stilled, and even the defendant's smirk lost a fraction of its sharpness. Judge Caprio carried a calm authority that needed no theatrics. His eyes swept across the courtroom, reading the tension like a map. He noticed the veteran's pale complexion, the slight strain in his posture. He noticed the defendant's casual slouch as well. Small details. Important details. The judge adjusted his glasses. A subtle gesture, but the lawyers on both sides recognized it. It meant he had already begun weighing the truth behind what he saw. Not just the facts on paper, but the character revealed in posture, silence, and breath. "Let's begin," Judge Caprio said gently. And with those two words, the atmosphere tightened, anticipation coiling through every corner of the courtroom like a drawn bowstring. The courtroom settled into a dense, expectant silence as Judge Caprio shifted his notes and looked directly at the defendant. The young man leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, chin lifted in that familiar display of defiance. His attorney nudged him subtly, a reminder to compose himself, but the defendant merely rolled his shoulders and smirked, as if the entire proceeding were beneath him. "Mr. Callahan," Judge Caprio began, voice calm but edged with unmistakable gravity, "how do you plead to the charges presented before this court?" The defendant didn't hesitate. With a shrug, he leaned toward the microphone and said, almost casually, "Not guilty." A ripple of disbelief washed over the gallery. Someone inhaled sharply. Another whispered, "Unbelievable." The veteran's attorney turned slowly, eyes widening just enough to show shock but not surprise. But the defendant wasn't done. He lifted his chin higher and added with a mocking exhale, "People are blowing this way out of proportion. It was barely even a confrontation." He pointed toward the veteran without looking at him. "Just lost his balance. It's not my fault he's old." The words were like a slap. A collective gasp surged through the room. Even the defendant's attorney closed his eyes, mortified. Judge Caprio didn't react immediately. He simply removed his glasses slowly, deliberately, and set them on the bench. The soft click of metal against wood echoed louder than the defendant's arrogance ever could. "Mr. Callahan," the judge said, voice low and controlled, "I suggest you choose your words carefully. Age is not an insult in this courtroom. Service is not something to be dismissed. And responsibility," he paused, letting the silence shape his meaning, "is not optional." The defendant scoffed under his breath, but the bravado had lost a little shine. His knee bounced once, betraying a nerve he didn't want anyone to see. In the front row, the veteran lowered his gaze, not out of shame, but from the weight of hearing his dignity dismissed so casually. His fingers tightened around the handle of his cane. Though he said nothing, the hurt in his stillness carried through the room like a quiet echo. Judge Caprio leaned forward slightly. "Your plea is entered," he said, "but let the record show, attitude is not a defense." A murmur of agreement rolled through the gallery. For the first time, the defendant's smile faltered, not because he understood the gravity of his situation, but because the courtroom no longer felt like a stage built for him. The lights dimmed slightly as the bailiff rolled in, a monitor, its wheels clicking softly against the courtroom floor. Every eye followed it. Even the defendant shifted in his seat, though he tried to mask the sudden tension, tightening his jaw. Judge Caprio nodded toward the prosecution. "Play the footage." The screen flickered to life. At first, the recording showed a quiet sidewalk illuminated by a street lamp. The veteran stood beside a small convenience store, waiting for his receipt, shoulders relaxed, posture patient. He adjusted the strap of his grocery bag. Nothing unusual, nothing confrontational. Just a man ending his day in peace. Then the defendant appeared on screen. He approached with two friends, swaggering in the same way he had entered the courtroom. The footage captured his laughter, loud, taunting, followed by a shove to his friend that sent the group stumbling sideways. They blocked the veteran's path, crowding him. The courtroom leaned forward collectively. On the footage, the veteran attempted to step around them. He even offered a polite gesture, a small nod, as if to excuse himself. But the defendant swatted his hand away, stepping closer, chest puffed out. He said something the camera didn't capture, but the veteran's flinch told enough. Then came the moment everyone had been discussing. The defendant shoved him hard. The veteran's cane slipped, clattering to the ground. His body hit the pavement with a sickening jolt. In the courtroom, someone covered their mouth. Another cursed under their breath. The defendant's attorney buried his face in his hands. But it wasn't over. The footage showed the defendant laughing afterward, a careless, dismissive laugh before walking away, leaving the elderly man struggling on the ground. Judge Caprio paused the video. The frame froze on the defendant's smirking face. A silence filled the room, so heavy it nearly hummed. "Mr. Callahan," the judge said quietly, "do you still believe this is merely a misunderstanding?" For once, the defendant had no words. The courtroom remained frozen in the aftershock of the paused video, the defendant's smirking face still glaring from the screen like a haunting reminder of the choices he could no longer outrun. Judge Caprio let the silence breathe, giving the truth room to settle on every shoulder. Then he turned gently toward the veteran. "Sir, if you feel ready, the court would like to hear from you." All eyes shifted. The veteran inhaled slowly, steadying himself as he rose to his feet. His cane supported his frame, but his dignity held the rest. When he spoke, his voice was soft, almost fragile, yet laced with the quiet strength that made the gallery lean forward instinctively. "I didn't come here today for revenge," he began. "I came because respect matters." And somewhere along the way, that young man forgot that. He glanced briefly toward the defendant, not with anger, but with something far more piercing: disappointment. The defendant swallowed hard, suddenly unable to maintain eye contact. The veteran continued, his fingers trembling slightly over the cane's worn handle. "I've survived things he'll never understand. I've seen men protect strangers like family. I've seen courage where there should have been fear. But that night," his voice caught, "that night I didn't see courage. I saw a boy trying to look powerful by hurting someone who posed no threat." A tear slipped down a woman's cheek in the front row. The veteran took another breath. "I didn't fall because I'm old. I fell because he pushed me hard. And when I hit the ground, all I could think was, how did we become a world where a man can laugh at another man's pain?" The defendant's shoulders sagged slightly. Judge Caprio folded his hands, the weight of the testimony settling deeply. The veteran's final words cut the room open with quiet truth. "I don't want him destroyed. I just want him to grow. Because someone, somewhere must teach him what respect looks like." The courtroom exhaled slowly, shakily. A faint rustle swept through the gallery as Judge Caprio shifted his gaze toward the doorway. He paused just long enough for tension to sharpen, then spoke with a deliberate calm that sent a ripple of anticipation through the room. "Chief Callahan," he said, "would you please come forward?" The defendant's father froze. For a man accustomed to commanding entire precincts with a single order, he suddenly looked smaller, not in stature, but in certainty. His polished shoes echoed through the courtroom as he walked toward the bench, the weight of every eye pressing down on his uniformed shoulders. The defendant stiffened. "Dad, you don't have to," but the chief raised a hand, silencing him with a gesture more parental than official. When he reached the front, he removed his hat, holding it gently against his chest. His voice, when it emerged, carried the roughness of sleepless nights. "Your Honor, I have been a police officer for 32 years. I have faced gangs, guns, riots, but nothing has ever shamed me like watching that video." He swallowed hard. "Nothing." A murmur rolled across the spectators. The defendant's bravado cracked. His jaw clenched, eyes darting from the judge to his father. Chief Callahan continued, his voice trembling with brutal honesty. "I taught my son right from wrong. I taught him to respect elders, to protect those who can't protect themselves. But somewhere along the line," he exhaled sharply, "he started believing my badge made him untouchable." The defendant looked down for the first time that day. The chief turned toward the veteran, his expression raw. "Sir, I'm deeply sorry. You deserved better. From my son, and from me as a father." Then he faced the judge again. "Your Honor, whatever sentence you decide, I will stand by it. I won't interfere. Today, he must learn." The defendant's shoulders collapsed inward, a young man finally realizing the one shield he relied on had lowered itself not out of betrayal, but out of love that demanded accountability. Judge Caprio rested his hands on the bench, his expression neither harsh nor forgiving, but profoundly steady. The kind of steadiness that holds a mirror up to a person's soul. The room quieted further, as if gravity itself leaned in to listen. "Mr. Callahan," he began softly, "both of you." His eyes shifted between father and son, acknowledging the painful crossroads they stood upon. The defendant lifted his gaze. His earlier arrogance had drained from his posture, replaced by something unsure, something young. His leg bounced nervously beneath the table. Judge Caprio continued, "Life gives us many tests. Some measure what we've learned, others reveal what we've ignored. But the most important tests," he leaned forward slightly, "show us who we are when no one is watching." The young man blinked rapidly, fighting emotion he didn't want to show. Strength, the judge said, is not loud. It is not cruel. Real strength is knowing how to protect, not how to harm. Real strength is understanding that every life, especially one that has carried the burdens of service, deserves respect. A murmur of agreement stirred through the gallery. He turned his attention to the defendant. You laughed, he said gently, not because you are evil, but because you are lost. You mistook privilege for power, tension for accomplishment, and mockery for confidence. The defendant swallowed hard, his throat tight. But today, Judge Caprio continued, you were given a gift, the gift of truth. Your father's honesty, the veteran's dignity, and this entire courtroom's reaction have shown you exactly who you have been. He paused, letting that weight settle before adding, but they have also shown you who you still have the chance to become. The defendant wiped at his eyes with the back of his sleeve, no longer pretending to be unaffected. Judge Caprio's voice softened. Character reveals itself in chaos. And today, chaos has revealed yours. The question now is whether you will let it define you or refine you. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was transforming him. Judge Caprio straightened the papers before him, though he didn't need them. His decision had crystallized long before he spoke, shaped not only by law, but by the deeper moral compass he carried into every judgment. The defendant sat forward, shoulders shaking, his earlier defiance entirely dissolved. His father stood nearby, posture firm, yet heavy with grief. The veteran watched quietly, hands resting on his cane, his expression patient and resolute. Mr. Callahan, the judge began, the law requires accountability, but justice requires understanding. Today, you will receive both. The defendant's breath hitched. First, Judge Caprio continued, you will pay a fine and serve probation. These are legal consequences for your actions. The young man nodded weakly, absorbing each word. Second, you will complete 200 hours of community service, not generic service, but specifically with veterans and rehabilitation programs. You will learn their stories, their sacrifices, their humanity. A ripple of approval moved through the gallery. Third, the judge said, voice firm, you will attend mandatory counseling for anger management and empathy development. Not as punishment, but as restoration. He paused, letting the defendant feel the meaning behind the sentence. And finally, Judge Caprio added, you will issue a full public apology. This includes a written statement, a video message, and a reading of your apology here in this courtroom, addressed to the man you harmed and to the community you misled. The defendant's eyes brimmed. He nodded again, more vigorously this time, as though clinging to the structure being given to him, a path out of the fog he had created. Judge Caprio looked at him gently. This is not a sentence meant to break you. It is a sentence meant to rebuild you, but only if you choose to walk it with sincerity. The young man's voice trembled as he whispered, I will, Your Honor. I promise. His father closed his eyes, a single tear slipping down unnoticed. The veteran gave a small, respectful nod. It was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was the beginning of something that could one day become it. Judge Caprio straightened the papers before him, though he didn't need them. His decision had crystallized long before he spoke, shaped not only by law, but by the deeper moral compass he carried into every judgment. The defendant sat forward, shoulders shaking, his earlier defiance entirely dissolved. His father stood nearby, posture firm, yet heavy with grief. The veteran watched quietly, hands resting on his cane, his expression patient and resolute. Mr. Callahan, the judge began, the law requires accountability, but justice requires understanding. Today, you will receive both. The defendant's breath hitched. First, Judge Caprio continued, you will pay a fine and serve probation. These are legal consequences for your actions. The young man nodded weakly, absorbing each word. Second, you will complete 200 hours of community service, not generic service, but specifically with veterans and rehabilitation programs. You will learn their stories, their sacrifices, their humanity. A ripple of approval moved through the gallery. Third, the judge said, voice firm, you will attend mandatory counseling for anger management and empathy development. not as punishment, but as restoration. He paused, letting the defendant feel the meaning behind the sentence. And finally, Judge Caprio added, "You will issue a full public apology. This includes a written statement, a video message, and a reading of your apology here in this courtroom, addressed to the man you harmed and to the community you misled." The defendant's eyes brimmed. He nodded again, more vigorously this time, as though clinging to the structure being given to him, a path out of the fog he had created. Judge Caprio looked at him gently. "This is not a sentence meant to break you. It is a sentence meant to rebuild you, but only if you choose to walk it with sincerity." The young man's voice trembled as he whispered, "I will, Your Honor. I promise." His father closed his eyes, a single tear slipping down unnoticed. The veteran gave a small, respectful nod. It was not forgiveness. Not yet, but it was the beginning of something that could one day become it. The weight in the courtroom shifted, not lighter, but clearer as Judge Caprio finished delivering the sentence. Yet as impactful as the ruling was, it did not close the story. It opened the door to something far more fragile and rare, the possibility of redemption. The gallery exhaled collectively, their anger softening into something more tender, more hopeful. They had not come to see a young man destroyed. They had come to see him understand. 6 months later, the world around Courtroom 3 felt different. Spring sunlight spilled warmly across the courthouse steps, gilding the stone edges and warming the benches where the veteran now sat waiting for the final review hearing. His posture was stronger than it had been months before. The bruises of the assault healed, though the memory lingered in softened outlines. He rested his hands over his cane, watching the slow movement of clouds overhead as people gathered behind him. Some recognized him, nodding quietly in respect. Others simply felt the gravity of the moment. Inside the courtroom, the once defiant young man entered with a very different energy. Gone was the swagger, the smirk, the careless posture. His suit was modest, his hair neatly combed, his eyes steady yet humble. He held a folder thick with reflections, counseling reports, and letters from the veterans he had worked with during his mandated service. He paused when he saw the veteran seated in the front row. His jaw tightened, not in rebellion, but in the weight of gratitude and remorse. He stepped forward slowly. "Sir," he said quietly, voice trembling in the space between them, "thank you for giving me the chance to be better than I was." The veteran regarded him for a long, silent moment. Then he nodded, a simple gesture, but profound enough to soften the air in the room. "Growth," he replied, "is earned, not given." Judge Caprio entered with a warm yet discerning expression. He had received reports long before this hearing, but nothing mattered more than what he saw in the young man's eyes now. No arrogance, no excuses, only humility and the irrepressible discomfort of someone who had truly confronted themselves. He addressed the courtroom. "In my years on this bench, I've learned that justice does not end with a sentence. It continues in the choices a person makes long after they leave this room. Today, Mr. Callahan stands before us, not perfect, but changed. And sometimes, that is the greatest outcome a courtroom can ever hope to witness." The defendant blinked back tears. The veteran offered a faint smile, small, but real. The tension that had once poisoned the room dissolved into something softer, more human. For the first time, the story felt ready to close, not on pain, but on possibility. As the courtroom emptied and the echo of footsteps faded down the marble hall, a strange and gentle quiet settled over the space, the kind that comes only after a storm has passed. Sunlight drifted through the high windows, warming the wooden benches that had held anger, sorrow, outrage, and finally, release. The world outside moved on with its usual haste, but inside this room, time seemed to soften, stretching into a calm exhale. The veteran stepped out into the afternoon light, pausing on the courthouse steps as a breeze lifted the brim of his cap. He inhaled deeply, the air tinged with the faint scent of spring. New leaves, warm pavement, possibility. Behind him, the young men he once feared crossing paths with, now held the door open for another visitor, his posture humble, his expression earnest. Their eyes met for only a moment, but it was enough. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a peace that no longer trembled. Judge Caprio lingered inside for a moment longer, placing his glasses gently onto the bench. He looked around the quiet room, the fading rays of sunlight turning the dust into golden flecks. Justice, he knew, was never a single moment. It was a journey, sometimes painful, sometimes humbling, always necessary. Outside, the breeze carried everything forward, toward healing, toward understanding, toward the kind of hope that grows slowly, quietly, and without permission.